YouTube! If you're watching this channel right now, man, you already know you're spending some downtime with Demille. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video today. So look, this video is going to be a little bit different than what I typically would do because this is a reaction video, but this particular reaction is going to be for my film aficionados. Where y'all at? Where are the movie critics? Where are the guys who look at movies and say, that's bad CG, or why is there too much CG in here? Well, guess what? This particular video is gonna be for you because I'm gonna be reacting to another YouTube channel called The Critical Drinker. And he posted a video called, Why Do Modern Movies Suck? And so I'm gonna do a reaction to that. And I think I got a little something to say since I'm in the animation and visual effects industry or working my way into that. So look, if this is your first time visiting the channel, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, share this video, tell your friends about Downtime with Demille. Also on Instagram, if you're into animation, you can follow me at Demille_studios. We're not gonna waste any more time. We're gonna get right into this reaction of why do modern movies suck? Here we go. Without further ado, got the wrong one. Here we go. Let's do this.
You know, watching Top Gun Maverick the other day and thinking about what the actors and film crew must have gone through to actually capture that air combat footage, it really hammered home something that's been pissing me off about modern movies for a long time now. A phenomenon that I could best describe as CGI overload. Digital technology is advanced to the point where computers can conjure up just about anything our creative minds can imagine, from incredible alien worlds to terrifying monsters and death-defying action scenes. It's revolutionized cinema to such an extent that it's almost difficult to remember a time before it existed. And on the face of it, it should have resulted in a better end product. After all, CGI doesn't rely on actors hitting their marks or force directors to find inventive ways of making difficult scenes possible. It doesn't force stuntmen to risk life and limb to get that perfect visual. It doesn't require complicated pyrotechnics or sound stages or expensive and challenging location shoots. It's controllable, it's predictable, it's safe, it's cost effective, and well, it's boring as fuck. It feels like movies now are locked into a kind of never-ending dick-waving contest, each striving to outdo the other with ever more ridiculous, overblown, gravity-defying CGI action scenes, most of which carry all the weight, impact and believability of a left hook from Natalie Portman. And I mean the non-enhanced version, but don't worry, we'll talk more about that later. And that's not even talking about what the fucking actors have to work with now. Honestly, watch some of the behind-the-scenes footage of any Marvel movie. It's some of the most depressing shit that I think I've ever seen. Just actors standing around in big empty green rooms having no fucking clue what they're supposed to be reacting to. This is it, boys and girls. This is the magic of movie making now. Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear that this isn't just some excuse to shit all over CGI as a concept, or the people that produce it. Computer animators are just professionals doing the job they're hired to do. They're usually overworked, underpaid, striving to meet ridiculous deadlines, and lumbered with the thankless task of producing something that only really gets noticed if they fuck up. I also fully acknowledge that CGI can be a useful tool when it's properly used, and there's been plenty of movies where it was genuinely difficult to tell what was real and what wasn't. That being said, it's not a magical silver bullet that can fix every problem, and when it's been rushed or poorly implemented, well, it can look like absolute dog shit. My general rule of thumb is that if you can do something with stunt work, practical effects or location shoots, then you probably should. Because believe it or not, humans have actually got a pretty good eye for this kind of thing, and the more you do it, the less engaging your movie becomes. Take vehicle stunts for example. Mad Max 2 from way back in 1981 gave us some of the most incredible car chases, spectacular wrecks and crashes ever shown on screen, to the point where several stuntmen were severely injured in the line of duty. Obviously that's a tragic accident, but it definitely pays off when it comes to what you see on screen. Every time a car gets flipped or smashed to pieces or blown up, there's a kind of visceral realism to it because, well, it was real. These vehicles really did get destroyed for these scenes. This poor bastard really did cartwheel through the air because he kind of fucked up his stunt. And the sequel, Fury Road, is probably one of the best examples of limited use of VFX in modern movie making that I can think of. It relied almost entirely on stunt work and practical effects with just a little bit of CGI here and there to enhance it, and well, it looks fucking great as a result. Now compare it to this scene from The Fast and the Furious that was clearly done with wire work and CGI backgrounds. Notice the difference in terms of immersion and believability. It's basically just a live action cartoon at this point. Or how about this stunt from The Man with the Golden Gun? No special effects for this one. Some mad bastard actually had to corkscrew his way across a river, and if he'd misjudged the jump by a few feet either way, he'd probably have earned a one-way ticket to the local ICU.
That is impressive.
Now compare it to this scene from The Transporter 2, where our man has to use a conveniently placed crane arm to remove a bomb from the underside of his car. Apart from looking fake as fuck, it's also ridiculous on a purely conceptual level, because you know that there's no way anyone could actually hope to time a jump like this. And it's not just cars flying through the air either. Look at this shot from Terminator 2, where a chopper has to fly underneath a freeway overpass. There was no computer trickery involved in this one. They actually used a real chopper flown by a fucking Vietnam veteran, and the shot was considered so dangerous that the film crew refused to shoot it. So James Cameron ended up filming it himself. And well, it pays off. It looks real because it fucking is. It's the same deal with explosions and pyrotechnics in action sequences. I mean, look at this epic scene from Hard Boiled, one of John Woo's greatest ever movies. All of this was done with squibs and blanks and pyrotechnics, and probably a shit ton of rehearsals to get the 3.5-minute sequence to work. If any one of these actors had missed his mark or fucked up his lines or forgotten his next action, they would have had to start the whole scene again. How many movies today would put in that kind of effort? Or would they just use multiple cuts and highly controllable CGI explosions to produce it in the quickest, safest and most efficient way possible? But what about fist fights? Well, take a look at the subway fight from the first Matrix movie. It's an excellent back and forth fight sequence with solid choreography that doesn't outstay its welcome and actually tells a cohesive story about the shift in momentum between the two main characters. And while there's definitely wire work involved, it's still very much two actors fighting in a real physical location. Every kick and punch has actual weight behind it, and the sets look solid and convincing because they actually exist. They're not just some flat, soulless background that was composited in later. Skip forward a few years to their final battle in the Matrix Revolutions, and what do you get? A CGI Neo and a CGI Smith endlessly punching each other while flying through a CGI city in the CGI pouring rain. You see how much less involving and engaging it is? You see how constantly trying to up the stakes and spectacle actually makes it harder to connect with what's going on? Shit man, Star Wars fell victim to this kind of thing decades ago. The lightsaber fights between Luke and Vader in the OT weren't big choreographed affairs with incredible moves and spectacular effects shots. Most of the time they were fighting in dimly lit rooms and corridors. It was tight and claustrophobic and clumsy at times, but it worked because it was more about the emotions of the two characters than the moves they could pull off. The physical constraints of the time forced the director to focus more on the emotion of the characters, and it paid off. Then compare it to the fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. That shit's got them flying and leaping all over the place in CGI form, pulling off very obviously choreographed moves, and battling through crazy spectacular landscapes for what feels like 15 minutes straight. It reeks of excess and over-the-top spectacle at the expense of good storytelling, and it pretty much exemplifies the lesson that bigger isn't always better. But what about creatures and monsters, you might ask? I mean, we've been fascinated with stuff like that since the dawn of cinema. What's scarier than a good monster? Well, terrifyingly bad CGI. And no, I'm not even going into the obvious stuff like the hilariously shit Scorpion King. First up, let's look at two examples from the same director, Peter Jackson, best known as the director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, the orcs from the Lord of the Rings were actually done with practical effects. This dude right here was put together with prosthetics and makeup, and I think we could all agree he looks pretty damn good. The makeup effects, the armor, the size and build, even the contact lenses on the eyes, they all add up to a pretty convincing character on screen. He's still vaguely humanoid, but monstrous and deformed at the same time. A bit bit like your average nightclub goer in Aberdeen. Now consider a similar antagonist from the Hobbit trilogy, made more than a decade later and relying more heavily on CGI. You see how boring and lifeless his face looks now? How there's no real detail or expression in his features, his clothes, or his overall appearance? He's just this dull grey blob that does absolutely nothing. He's not intimidating and he's not interesting, and in fact it's very obvious that he doesn't even exist. I know which one I'd rather have in my movie. Damn man, we're even using CGI on actors themselves now, like Natalie Portperson, who in reality looks like she's been on hunger strike for 3 weeks straight. But what's a girl to do when she's forced to play a big buff goddess of thunder? Does she go through months of intense physical training and dieting to build herself up, just like her male co-star? Or does she just show up as she is and let the CGI department give her the body she couldn't be bothered building for herself? I think we all know the answer to that one. Now, I could probably prattle on for hours about this shit, giving you example after example of practical effects winning out over CGI, but I think you get the point I'm making here. The more movies rely on CGI, the less engaging the experience becomes for the audience, because deep down, they know there's really nothing behind it. Yeah, there's a shit ton of work involved to make it look convincing, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the animators here, but it's not the same kind of work that has to go into shooting a continuous 5-minute action sequence where a single mistake can mean having to restart the whole thing from scratch. It's not the same as actors and stunt performers having to risk injury or death to capture some breathtaking stunts. And it's not the same as actors having to lumber around the set wearing heavy prosthetics or spend hours in the makeup chair to achieve the right result on screen. Yeah, computer animation can overcome the physical limitations of practical effects, but what's the point if nobody actually buys into what they're seeing? CGI absolutely has its place in modern movie making. In fact, it's a vital weapon in the arsenal of most filmmakers now, allowing them to show things that would be almost impossible to achieve any other way. But it's not a magical solution to every problem. It's not there to turn live action movies into tightly controlled animating features with occasional appearances from real actors. It should be used to enhance practical effects, not to replace them. If you suck all of the risk and challenge and inventiveness out of movie making and try to replace it with sterile animated spectacle, then you take away the most important aspect of movies altogether, the humanity. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a price that I'm not willing to pay. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Okay. Alright, so that was the critical drinker basically reacting to, or basically doing his own video of why do modern movies suck. Okay, so I kind of feel like I have an opinion about this because, you know, I'm into animation and visual effects. That's what I went to school for and graduated with a degree in animation and visual effects. I'm also an animator, 3D character animator, so this is pretty much kind of like my wheelhouse. Now, my opinion is not a end all be all. It's just more or less my opinion on what I think about, you know, the use of practical effects versus, you know, special effects or visual effects or animation in movies. Okay, so I would say this. I do agree with some of what he said, and that a lot of times I think that you can get a more impactful performance if you're using, you know, practical effects, because there's some amazing movies that are made today where it's really not a whole lot of CG. I mean, you can take a look at Tom Cruise's movies where he does a lot of his own stunts. There's no CG. I mean, there's probably some CG in some of those movies like Mission Impossible, but a lot of that stuff he does himself. All of that stuff, some of that stuff is done in camera, you know, or a lot of it is done in camera, or a lot of it is just practical effects where there's no CG. Now, I would say this, though. I feel like there are some movies that get, you know, CG bad. Like when they showed the Scorpion King in that trailer, that, you know, montage we just looked at. Okay, that was not good CG. But, you know, you got to think about it too. Like, how else would you have done something like that if you're trying to make this larger than life? I mean, I think, honestly, you'd have to just have better CG. And that was a long time ago when they made that movie. So, you know, better CG, I think, definitely makes better results. But I just feel like in some cases, it might be unescapable. I really believe that. And so you look at movies today like, you know, The Incredible Hulk. You know, you look at movies like Star Wars, movies like, you know, you take any movie that came from like decades ago and you look at them now, and the first thing that you notice is that a lot of these movies are using a lot more CG now. Well, think about it from this perspective. Back in the 80s, you had Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk, playing the real life, you know, Hulk, who was not CG at all, practical effects, makeup, just a big muscular guy wearing a wig, and he was the Hulk. And now you have the CG Hulk, which is all CG, all, you know, all the way through. Now, I believe this, and this is just my personal opinion, as time goes on, you have to evolve, you have to get better. That particular Hulk that was done in the 80s, in this entertainment climate that we're in, I don't think it would work. So, you know, you have to do real life CG to make it even bigger and better and grander and more spectacle. I don't think that old Hulk, the Lou Ferrigno, don't get me wrong, I love Lou Ferrigno and I love what he did with the Hulk, but I'm just saying, in a modern Marvel movie, I don't think that would work. You'd have to go with something that is, you know, and really when you think about it, you know, the Ed Norton Hulk was closer to what you would see in the comic books. Hulk was huge. You can't replicate that even with the best bodybuilder. And then, you know, he did an example of how Star Wars, you know, they showed the fight between Luke and Darth Vader and how it was just not a whole lot going on. And, you know, there was just a lot of practical effects. And at that time, that was great. But as time goes on, you know, you've got more tools at your disposal. You're talking about, you know, movie studios that are basically using IMAX cameras now, you know, in IMAX theaters. So it's a bigger spectacle now. And so more is expected, more is capable, you know, with these directors putting together all of the animation and the visual effects. What worked then, you know, with that tight lightsaber battle between Luke and Darth Vader, that same one wouldn't work because it wouldn't be pushing it to the limits. And that's what it's really all about nowadays. You know, even like when they showed the old clip of like King Kong back in the day, he was black and white. It looks like he was stop motion. Again, something like that would probably not work today because you're talking about, you know, studios have access to a vast amount of resources. Like I said before, IMAX cameras, you got IMAX theaters. You wouldn't do something like that in a theater, a stop motion, you know, King Kong, Godzilla in a theater like that today. No, it would be CG. There's the only way. And the thing about it is, for the films that have really, really bad CG, like the example he gave of I think it was The Hobbit. Now, I believe where that went wrong was they needed someone to really give a good facial performance for that character. Let's just say, for example, if you got Andy Serkis to do the facial performance using the motion capture dots all over their face, and you had him to do that, I think that would have been more memorable. That's the difference between mediocre CG and exceptional CG. There's a huge difference. And so I think that, you know, the reality is, I sum this video up, I really think that with CG in movies nowadays, I believe that number one, it's just where we are right now. You're gonna have movies where there's a lot of CG. There's still gonna be some that are practical effects, you know, and when I say practical effects, I'm talking about very minimal CG. But then you're gonna have movies where there's a ton of CG, especially your Marvel and DC. The key is making sure that it's really, really good. And if you're gonna have like a CG character where he's completely CG, like the Hulk, or someone like, you know, Caesar from Planet of the Apes, you really need to have someone like Andy Serkis doing that motion capture to make sure everything looks believable and it's on point. Because if you don't, then you end up looking like something out of The Hobbit. That's just the way it is. So I don't have a problem with too much CG. If it makes the movie better, this is where we are. I don't want to go to an IMAX movie and see something that's stop motion, or seeing something that looks like, you know, it should have been, the time period was maybe in the 70s. We've kind of moved beyond that now. I'm not a fan of great practical effects either though. If you can do something really cool without having to use a whole bunch of CG, more power to you. I will watch it, and I love movies like that too. I'm just saying, this is where we are. It is what it is. So with that said, I'm ending this video. Those are my thoughts on the Critical Drinkers video of why do modern movies suck? What did you guys think about this? What is your opinion on movies today? Post your thoughts down in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about it. Question: of all the movies that you've seen in the past, let's just say 10 years, which movie in your opinion had the best CG and which one had the worst CG? Leave that down in the comments below as well. So I'm gonna end this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like this video, on the way out, hit that like button, share this video. And as I always say, if you can see this video, man, you are truly, truly blessed. And as always, what are you gonna do in your downtime? Peace! Subscribe!